A retired pharmacist who spent 34 years filling diabetes prescriptions once described what he called the worst day of his career. It was not a dispensing error. It was not a drug interaction that harmed someone. It was an afternoon when he finally fully read, a nutrition study that had been sitting in a medical journal since 2007. A study he had technically been aware of for years, a study whose findings, if he had handed them to any one of the hundreds of diabetic patients whose prescriptions he filled every week, might have changed their morning fasting numbers without changing a single medication. The ingredient the study used cost 3 cents per serving. He said the worst part was not that he had never mentioned it. The worst part was that he had never been asked to. Not once. In 34 years. Not by a patient, not by a physician, not by a pharmaceutical representative who visited his counter weekly with samples, literature, and lunch. He retired 6 months after reading that study. Today, at the Eternal Vigor Way, I'm going to show you what was in it, and 6 other foods with peer-reviewed clinical evidence behind them that most people managing blood sugar have never heard about. The food ranked number 1 works on 3 blood sugar pathways simultaneously. No diabetes medication currently on the market addresses all 3 at once. Stay through the entire ranking, because the section at the end, the dangerous combinations between these foods and common diabetes medications, is the part nobody else is telling you. Why food works on blood sugar at the cellular level. Before the ranking, one concept needs to be understood, because it is what separates this list from a generic eat healthy recommendation. Blood sugar elevation in type 2 diabetes is not simply a matter of eating too much sugar. It is the failure of 3 specific biological processes: glucose absorption in the small intestine, glucose uptake into muscle and fat cells, and glucose production by the liver overnight. Most diabetes medications target one of these processes. Metformin primarily suppresses liver glucose production. Sulfonylureas stimulate insulin secretion. GLP-1 agonists slow gastric emptying. The foods on this list work through these same pathways, some through a single mechanism, some through multiple simultaneously. Understanding which pathway each food targets is what allows you to use them strategically alongside existing treatment rather than randomly. One critical point: none of the foods on this list replace medication. They are adjunctive. They add to what medication is already doing through mechanisms that medication may not be fully addressing. That distinction matters both for safety and for realistic expectation setting. Green tea contains a compound called EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate. Its primary mechanism relevant to blood sugar is the inhibition of alpha amylase, the enzyme in the small intestine responsible for breaking complex carbohydrates into glucose. When that enzyme is slowed, glucose enters the bloodstream gradually rather than in a rapid surge. The spike flattens. EGCG additionally activates AMPK, adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase, the same metabolic pathway that metformin targets. The difference is that metformin activates this pathway pharmacologically with the side effect profile that entails. A 2013 meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition reviewed 17 randomized controlled trials involving over 1,000 participants. Green tea consumption significantly reduced fasting, blood glucose, and fasting insulin, not just the glucose number, but the underlying hormonal response. That distinction indicates the effect is mechanistic, not incidental. The limitation is temporal. Green tea's benefits require 8 to 12 weeks of daily consumption to reach clinical significance, and they diminish when consumption stops. It is a maintenance tool, not an acute intervention. Practical note: EGCG is significantly degraded by water above 80 degrees Celsius. brewing with boiling water destroys a meaningful portion of the active compound. Water at 75 to 80 degrees preserves the catechin content. Matcha, ground whole leaf, delivers 3 to 5 times the EGCG of steeped tea. 1 cup daily with the largest meal. That is the dose the evidence supports. Raw ginger contains compounds called gingerols and shogaols that act on blood sugar through 3 simultaneous pathways. The first, gingerols, increase glucose uptake into skeletal muscle cells independently of insulin signaling. Muscle cells absorb glucose directly, reducing the amount remaining in circulation without requiring the pancreas to produce additional insulin. The second, gingerols inhibit hepatic gluconeogenesis, the process by which the liver manufactures new glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. In adults over 60, this process accelerates. The liver produces excess glucose continuously, including overnight. Ginger's inhibitory effect on this pathway directly addresses one of the primary mechanisms driving worsening fasting blood sugar in older adults. The third, ginger reduces systemic inflammatory markers. Chronic low-grade inflammation, documented extensively in aging adults under the term inflammaging, directly damages insulin receptors. Damaged receptors cannot respond normally to insulin signaling. Ginger's anti-inflammatory action slows the progressive receptor deterioration that makes blood sugar increasingly difficult to control over time. A 2014 randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial, the most rigorous design in clinical research, gave adults with type 2 diabetes 2 grams of ginger powder daily for 12 weeks. The ginger group showed significant reductions in fasting blood glucose and HbA1c. The control group, with the same diet, same medications, same lifestyle, showed no change. Practical use: grate approximately 1 inch of fresh ginger into hot water or add to meals. If using powder, 2 grams daily, roughly 3/4 of a teaspoon. Consume with food rather than on an empty stomach to avoid digestive discomfort. Broccoli sprouts, the 3 to 5 day old seedlings, not mature broccoli, contain a compound called sulforaphane in concentrations 10 to 100 times higher than the vegetable. Sulforaphane's mechanism is distinct from every other food on this list. It operates at the level of gene expression. Specifically, it reduces the expression of genes in the liver that drive excess glucose production. This is not a theoretical effect demonstrated in cell cultures. It was documented in human patients. A 2017 study published in Science Translational Medicine, one of the most rigorous translational research journals in existence, tested concentrated broccoli sprout extract in 97 adults with type 2 diabetes. Participants with dysregulated blood sugar who received sulforaphane showed significant reduction in fasting glucose compared to placebo. The researchers specifically noted that sulforaphane targets hepatic glucose production through a pathway that metformin does not address. This is the critical finding. Sulforaphane and metformin work on the liver through completely different mechanisms. An individual taking metformin daily may still have the sulforaphane-sensitive pathway running unchecked, producing excess glucose because metformin does not touch it. Practical preparation. Broccoli sprouts can be grown at home from seeds in 3 to 5 days using only a jar, water, and twice daily rinsing. Eat approximately 100 grams raw, on salads, in smoothies, on sandwiches. Do not cook them. Heat destroys sulforaphane. The therapeutic compound survives only in the raw form. Curcumin, the active polyphenol in turmeric, works primarily through 2 mechanisms relevant to blood sugar. The first is reduction of inflammation in pancreatic beta cells. Beta cells produce insulin. When chronically inflamed, as they become after decades of blood sugar fluctuations, they malfunction, producing insulin too slowly or in insufficient quantities. Curcumin's anti-inflammatory action on beta cell tissue directly addresses this age-associated deterioration. The second is improvement of insulin receptor sensitivity. Curcumin reduces the oxidative stress that damages insulin receptors over time, improving the signaling efficiency between insulin and its cellular targets. Less insulin is needed to achieve the same glucose clearance. The landmark evidence, a 2012 study published in Diabetes Care, the official journal of the American Diabetes Association, followed 240 adults with prediabetes for 9 months. Half received curcumin supplementation, half received placebo. At 9 months, in the placebo group, 16.4% had progressed to full type 2 diabetes. In the curcumin group, 0. Not one participant progressed. The curcumin group also showed improved beta cell function, reduced insulin resistance, and lower inflammatory markers, all without any change in medication. This study was published in the American Diabetes Association's own journal. That fact deserves a moment of consideration. Absorption is the practical challenge with turmeric. Turmeric powder from a spice rack contains approximately 3% curcumin by weight, insufficient for therapeutic effect. To achieve meaningful absorption, 2 conditions must be met simultaneously: the presence of piperine, a compound in black pepper that increases curcumin bioavailability by approximately 2,000%, and a source of dietary fat, since curcumin is fat-soluble. A preparation of turmeric with black pepper and a fat source, olive oil, coconut oil, or ghee, delivers curcumin in an absorbable form. Curcumin supplements standardized to 95% curcuminoids are the alternative for consistent dosing. Before the final 3, which is where the evidence becomes the most clinically striking and where the safety interactions become most important to understand, I want to stop for a moment. What you have just heard is published, peer-reviewed clinical evidence. It appeared in journals that include the American Diabetes Association's own publication. It is not fringe research. It is not preliminary data. It is the kind of evidence that should have reached you through the standard channels of medical care, and did not. That gap between what the evidence shows and what most adults over 60 are actually told is precisely what the Eternal Vigor Way exists to close. Every week, this channel translates current research on metabolic health and aging into evidence that you can actually act on. Subscribe right now before we continue, because the next 3 foods include the ingredient from that 2007 bedtime study, and the safety section that follows is the part of this video most important to your safety if you are on any diabetes medication. Subscribe, then stay with me. Fenugreek seeds contain an unusual amino acid called 4-hydroxyisoleucine that is found in meaningful concentrations in almost no other food. Its mechanism is specific and clinically important. It directly stimulates insulin secretion from beta cells, but only when blood glucose is elevated. When blood sugar is in a normal range, the stimulus is minimal. This glucose-dependent stimulation is what distinguishes Fenugreek from sulfonylurea medications, which force insulin release regardless of current blood sugar levels. The differential activation profile means the risk of hypoglycemia, dangerously low blood sugar, a genuine medical emergency in older adults, is substantially lower with Fenugreek than with this drug class. The second mechanism is mechanical. Fenugreek seeds are extremely high in soluble fiber. When soaked overnight in water, the seeds develop a gel-like coating. That gel slows gastric emptying, the rate at which food leaves the stomach, which means glucose from a meal enters the bloodstream gradually rather than in a rapid influx. A 2014 meta-analysis published in a peer-reviewed nutrition journal reviewed 10 clinical trials on Fenugreek and blood sugar control. The pooled result, Fenugreek reduced fasting blood glucose by an average of 17.64 milligrams per deciliter. It also significantly improved HbA1c across the studies reviewed. Practical protocol: soak 1 tablespoon of fenugreek seeds in water overnight. In the morning, drink the soaking water and eat the softened seeds 30 minutes before breakfast on an empty stomach. The soaking activates the soluble fiber content and reduces the natural bitterness. Ground powder, half a teaspoon in warm water, is the alternative for those who find the texture difficult. Safety note: do not combine fenugreek with sulfonylurea medications, including glipizide, glyburide, or glympyride, without medical supervision. Both stimulate insulin secretion. Combined, they can produce hypoglycemia severe enough to cause falls, confusion, or loss of consciousness. This is not a theoretical risk. It is a documented interaction in older adults. Cinnamon contains a polyphenol called MHCP, methyl hydroxycalcone polymer, that mimics insulin by binding to the same receptor sites on cell surfaces that insulin targets and independently opening glucose transport channels. This means glucose can enter cells even when the body's own insulin response is compromised. MHCP also activates insulin receptor kinase, increasing the sensitivity of existing insulin receptors, making whatever insulin the pancreas still produces more effective per unit. The landmark evidence: a study published in Diabetes Care gave 60 adults with type 2 diabetes either 1, 3, or 6 grams of cinnamon daily, or placebo, for 40 days. All 3 cinnamon doses, including the lowest dose of 1 gram, less than half a teaspoon, produced significant reductions in fasting blood glucose, ranging from 18 to 29%. A 2013 meta-analysis in the Annals of Family Medicine reviewed 10 randomized controlled trials and confirmed cinnamon intake significantly reduces fasting glucose, with an average reduction across studies of approximately 25 milligrams per deciliter. The reason this is not ranked number 1 is specificity. Cinnamon works most powerfully on post-meal glucose spikes and insulin receptor sensitivity. It does not meaningfully address overnight liver glucose production, which is the mechanism that determines what your fasting number reads before breakfast. Critical safety distinction: there are 2 types of cinnamon sold in most grocery stores. Ceylon cinnamon, also labeled Cinnamomum verum, contains negligible amounts of coumarin, a compound that is toxic to the liver at sustained high doses. Cassia cinnamon, the common variety sold without specification, contains approximately 250 times more coumarin than Ceylon. Daily use of cassia at therapeutic doses presents a documented hepatotoxicity risk. Use only Ceylon cinnamon. Verify the label before purchasing. Half to 1 teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon daily, taken with a meal for best effect on post-meal glucose response. Drug interaction note: do not take curcumin or cinnamon supplements within 2 hours of diabetes medication. Both slow the liver enzyme that metabolizes certain drugs, which can extend the drug's active time in the body beyond the intended dose. A 2-hour separation eliminates this interaction. The 2007 study referenced at the opening of this video used apple cider vinegar. 2 tablespoons diluted in water, consumed at bedtime. Fasting blood sugar the following morning was significantly lower in the treatment group than the control group, in adults who were already on diabetes medication. The vinegar effect was additive, not substitutive. The mechanism explains why this food ranks first. It is the only item on this list that addresses all 3 blood sugar pathways simultaneously. The first pathway, absorption, acetic acid, the active compound in vinegar, inhibits disaccharидase enzymes in the small intestine that break complex carbohydrates into absorbable glucose. Slow the enzyme, slow the glucose flood. The second pathway, cellular uptake. Acetic acid activates AMPK in skeletal muscle, the same pathway activated by metformin and by the green tea catechins described earlier. This drives glucose uptake into muscle tissue independently of insulin signaling, accelerating clearance from the bloodstream. The third pathway, and this is what makes it number one, overnight liver suppression. Acetic acid suppresses hepatic gluconeogenesis, the process by which the liver manufactures new glucose during the overnight fast. This is the process responsible for the phenomenon many adults with diabetes know well, waking to a fasting glucose reading that is higher than it was at bedtime despite eating nothing overnight. The liver does not stop producing glucose when you sleep. In adults with insulin resistance, it often accelerates production during the night. The 2007 study's bedtime protocol directly targets this mechanism. The vinegar acts on the liver's overnight glucose output while the person is sleeping. By morning, the fasting number is lower, not because of anything that happened during the night consciously, but because the liver produced less glucose while suppressed. A 2004 study in diabetes care tested vinegar in adults with type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, and healthy controls. In the insulin-resistant group, post-meal insulin sensitivity improved by 34%. In the type 2 diabetes group, 19%. The researchers' conclusion described vinegar's effect on carbohydrate metabolism as comparable to pharmaceutical interventions. That phrase appeared in the American Diabetes Association's own journal. Protocol: before the largest meal of the day, dilute 1 to 2 tablespoons of raw unfiltered apple cider vinegar in 8 ounces of water. Drink 15 to 20 minutes before eating. Before bed, dilute 2 tablespoons in 8 ounces of water. Drink within 30 minutes of sleeping. Always dilute. Undiluted acetic acid damages tooth enamel and can irritate the esophageal lining. Use a straw to minimize dental contact. Rinse the mouth with plain water after. Purchase raw, unfiltered vinegar, the variety with visible cloudy sediment in the bottle, which contains the full spectrum of active compounds. Drug interaction note: do not combine apple cider vinegar with metformin if you have any history of kidney impairment without discussing it with your physician first. Both can lower potassium levels. Combined in a compromised kidney environment, this may produce hypokalemia, dangerous potassium depletion that affects cardiac rhythm. If on metformin, begin with 1 tablespoon rather than 2 and inform your treating physician. Implement 1 change every 3 days, not all 7 simultaneously. This allows you to identify any digestive or symptomatic response and attribute it accurately. Day 1. 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar diluted in water at bedtime. Record fasting blood sugar every morning for 7 days. Compare day 7 to day 1. Day 3, add half a teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon to your morning meal. Day 7, add Fenugreek, 1 tablespoon soaked overnight, consumed 30 minutes before breakfast. If on sulfonylurea medication, speak with your physician before this step. Week 2. If tolerating the above without issue, add 1 cup of unsweetened green tea with your largest meal. Broccoli sprouts and ginger can be incorporated into meals at any point. They have the lowest interaction risk of any food on this list. Record your fasting blood sugar every morning throughout. After 30 days, bring the log to your physician, not to argue with them, to show them data. The numbers will speak on your behalf. The 2007 study costs nothing to conduct relative to a pharmaceutical trial. The ingredient cost 3 cents per serving. The result, measurably lower fasting blood sugar in medicated diabetic patients, was replicated and published twice. The information did not reach the people who needed it most because there was no commercial infrastructure to distribute it. No sales representatives, no continuing medical education sponsorships, no branded materials left in waiting rooms. The pipeline from evidence to patient requires funding at every stage, and the funding follows the profit margin. What you have just received is the evidence without the pipeline. 7 foods, 3 mechanisms, published results, documented interactions. A layered protocol you can begin tonight. If this video gave you something specific you can act on tonight, a protocol, a mechanism, a safety interaction you needed to know before combining these foods with your medication, then you understand what the Eternal Vigor Way is built to deliver. Every week, this channel goes through the peer-reviewed literature on aging and metabolic health and translates it into practical, evidence-based guidance for adults over 60. No products to sell, no pharmaceutical relationships, no time constraints. Subscribe before you close this video, because next week we are covering the 5 foods that research identifies as the most damaging to insulin receptor function in adults over 60, including 2 that appear in standard heart-healthy recommendations and that most people over 60 consume daily without knowing what they are doing to their glucose metabolism. This is the Eternal Vigor Way. The evidence exists, it always has. Now you have it.